Okay, so I did a previous video on my league games. There's going to be a reorganisation when round 3 of the league starts, which will divide the leagues based on the results of players, so that stronger players are matched against other strong players, and people who are relatively new to the game are matched against other people who are relatively new to the game. So if you want to join, and we've had 1 or 2 new hands up already, go to the link below. Again, I don't organise this. That is being done by Canva. So obviously you need to go there, not contact me if you're interested in joining in the league. Today is just an update, focusing mostly on just 2 of my games which have had significant progress. First of all, we have my long attack against Rondon, which you'll remember last time nothing had really happened. We'd got to this position, which is June 1941. There haven't been any major conflicts yet. The Axis forces are stacked up on the Soviet border, and this is a normal thing in long openings, that the Axis forces are just completely overwhelming. Remember, the Axis are intending to deliberately prolong this fight into 1942 to force the Moscow Treaty out to 1944. So in this case, I get poor weather in June, and I'm just delay the attack until July. It isn't going to make the blindest bit of difference to the actual outcome of the fighting. Skip forward to September, you can see we've just cut straight across the USSR. We've destroyed units wherever they've been in our path. The Soviets are now down to 2 national will, and you can see that I've managed to link up with units in the south around Batum in just 3 months. Notice here that Volkov is just open. That's a useful rule to remember. It's a very easy one to forget. I've forgotten it in a recent game. Fortresses do not project zones of control. So that Italian, and in this particular case, there's a lake to the east of Leningrad, so it wouldn't project a zone of control there anyway. So the Italian garrison could just move into Volkov. It won't, because again, I'm trying to keep the Soviets in the game until January, because that will extend the Moscow Treaty by 12 months. This is the beginning of December, and there hasn't been much movement. The key here is to try and keep the Soviets as far away from any captured cities as possible. My biggest worry would be the Soviets recapturing Tula or Voronezh in the first turn of the Russian winter, thus boosting the Soviet national will back up. Here's the first Soviet counter. This kills the garrison, but it still leaves them 2 hexes short of Tula. This is the second Soviet counter. And here you'll notice I've got troops in secondary line positions and a troop in the city itself, so that if the Soviets get a lucky DD, they still can't just walk through and recapture the city. They've still got considerably more fighting to engage in. But, as you can see, Minsk is undefended. The Soviets don't actually build any troops here at the end of December, so I just walk in at the beginning of January. I use my political success on Belgium. That's quite useful. I won't be able to mobilise any Belgian units, and I won't be able to put any German units into Belgium without triggering West Invaded, but it means that Belgium will offer no resistance when I begin my attack. The Allies can't invade because appeasement prevents them from moving into enemy countries. Another useful note, the Repatriation Rule helps speed up my redeployment. I can basically take all of my minor allies and return them to their home countries, which in the Italian case means moving them back to the locations that they actually need to be in for the attack. Okay, I did screw up a little bit here. One of the most complicated aspects of the Long War is that you have this narrow window to transfer forces from the eastern to the western front. It takes about 4 months to do that, minimum. But there are lots of moving parts to it. I got Iraq as an ally, which is modestly lucky, but this is a game in which you might conceivably be looking at conquering Iraq. So it's a thing that is possible. There should be 2 German infantry armies in Iraq to help flank French Syria. Unfortunately, those 2 armies in February are still in Romania, and that means that they're not going to get there in time. They should have done, but I would have needed to move them before I did the collapse, and I just wasn't thinking properly about it. This is the position at the end of May. There are essentially 5 fronts. Technically, there's a 6th on the island of Sardinia and Corsica. I could really do with a fair weather. Poor weather in June is going to be a massive inconvenience for me. Let's look at the different fronts. In Syria, the Allied defence is weak. The Turkish unit will be able to isolate Aleppo, and once that falls, Beirut and Damascus are open. Libya is the toughest front. I've deployed 2 German infantry down there. The UK and France have significant strength on both sides and a fair amount of naval assets. Holding on to Africa and preventing a Med lock is probably the key element in a long defence. If you can hold on to Africa until the Soviets re-enter the war in 1944, the extra year of fighting will likely take its toll on the Germans. If the Germans achieve a full Med lock where they completely conquer Africa and freeze the UK out by capturing Gibraltar and Suez, remember they have 18 months free of Eastern Front issues to do this, then that sets up an endgame that's very winnable for the Axis player. So, if anything, I might suggest that you ought to put more forces than this that are British and French into North Africa. Corsica has been left undefended, so that's 1 French national will that'll fall. I think this is probably the right call. That French garrison is just more useful elsewhere. I've got enough troops on the Italian front to at least pose a threat, and that's all I'm actually looking for there. The Italian air is on the Italian front, not because it's going to form part of an attack, but to help with the suppression of British and French air in the north of France. And the bulk of my weight is in the north. Belgium is friendly, so it's not going to slow me down. I have all 4 panzers here, because a breakthrough in the north is lethal to the French. But I start the fighting around Aleppo. As you can see, good odds, but by no means guaranteed. I'm attacking here on the off chance my opponent might be tempted to commit a tank counter. They don't. I get lucky, the garrison of Aleppo falls to the first attack, and the whole of Syria is in my hands. The second garrison is destroyed, and the UK unit is cut off by the end of the turn. These troops are now threatening to overrun Suez on the next turn. But back to France. There are no resources I will not be throwing at France. The surprise attack marker goes down first before I suppress the French Air Force. I've marked the main thrust of the attack here. The objective is to displace the guard units so that I can get into a position southeast of Lille. If I'm southeast of Lille, then I've cut off the retreat of the first tank. And that means that if I drop a paradrop onto that space, I may be able to destroy the French armour. Destroying units is critical. You have to destroy units. That thins the line out and makes the next round of attacks easier. I'm not overly keen on this French defence. It's a relatively common one people play. I don't like the unit west of Lille because it blocks the retreat out of that city. I don't like the French holding Lille. Ideally, for a strong defence, I like the British to hold Lille. The reason for this is fairly simple. You can't attack Lille until you've cleared Sedan, at least not effectively, and you cannot progress south until you've captured Calais. If you've got French units in Sedan and British units in Lille, this forces the Axis to engage both the RAF and the French Air Force, and that really digs into Axis resources. Anyway, I made a good breakthrough, and it gave me this attack with the paratroops, the armour, and the heavy artillery counter, and I got a good roll, about a 50-50 chance, and eliminated the French armour. You do have to be a little bit careful. I very nearly fell into a supply trap here. Essentially, you can't push south of the Seine or the Marne without first of all capturing Calais, because you have no way to get supplies to those troops. And a supply trap in an invasion of France is a pain in the neck. It takes that unit out of action. It gives the French an opportunity for a counterattack. Probably wouldn't save them here, but it's something you absolutely should be avoiding. Quick note on switches. I ran a switch with Stavanger. Switches are a hugely important tactical trick and should be set up for every major German offensive. They are usually a way of bypassing the home defence rules. In this case, I'm using it to avoid giving up the +1 to strategic warfare for having an Axis plane in Stavanger. And I'm doing the same thing at Posen, the standard Posen switch. At the start of my next turn, I will take the fighter that's exhausted and I will strategic move it all the way to the east, and then I will fly a unit from Posen to the front line to join in the attack. If you've got well-organised switches, that's the ability to bring half a dozen extra sorties to any offensive. I was stunningly successful with this turn. The dice definitely went in my favour. The breakthrough in the Alps I had no right to expect, and I would not normally expect to reach Paris in the north. But there is no front that I did not do well on. The French are down to 11 national will, and pretty much the whole of France is open. I should be able to seize 6 cities and collapse France next turn. The Italian navy did get hammered, but it did get through, and it supplied the 3 critical units. That is the 2 German units holding the 2 fronts, and the Italian unit in the Tobruk fort. So I have supply for next turn. Feel confident about holding on both sides and should be in a position to achieve the upper hand in the Mediterranean. If I were defending a long war, which I've never actually done because this is the least common opening that people play, and I've never had somebody play it against me, this would be my focus. I would be looking at ways of concentrating Allied forces in Africa to attempt to disrupt and destroy German forces that are there, knock the Italians out of North Africa, and essentially set up a good defence for the British for the 12 to 18 months they then need to hold out after this. That, of course, assumes that the Axis player deploys the way that I did. If the Axis player committed greater resources to Africa, then you might consider trying to make a stand in France. France is tough in 1942, and if the German attack is weak or a little unlucky, it can hold. My East First game, my East First attack has very little to report. One of the nice things about the USA League and community is that it allows room for varied paces of play. So if one player needs to take a break for some reason, that's okay. And unless they're gone for a month or more, they're not going to get kicked out. Here, very little moved on. We're building up for the 1941 invasion of France. East First games are a real ping-pong affair. The Axis go east and have to defeat the Russians quickly. Then they have to race west to defeat the French. Then they have to immediately turn around and race east to fight a continuation against the Russians again. Finally, let's look at my historic defence. A reminder, the Soviets here are trying an experiment. They are refusing to hold the border, and they are deliberately retreating 4 to 5 hexes to preserve units. And in this game, I paid the full price for this experiment. Both May and June were poor weather, so if the Soviets had stood at the border, they'd have held. I haven't lost a single unit. I've not yet had a unit pinned. The fighters are at full strength. And I'm falling back to the next defensive line, this time on the Don. I don't actually, and this is one of the issues, I only have 16 production points. I can't rebuild the fighters and move all of the troops. This move left me with 8 production points, enough to build my 2 outstanding infantry and replace 2 sorties. I plan to use a strategic move to move the remaining unit from the front line back to a defensive position. I had not considered this, so it came as a bit of a surprise. My opponent started focusing on clearing up Leningrad and Sevastopol. Myself, I usually bypass the fortresses. It burns up a lot of German units to make the attack, and they are not sure things. This one, for example, bounced. Sevastopol didn't. I rolled a 1 for the Soviets. So this, with a number of other things, is a learning curve for this game. If playing some variation on this defence, I think in future I absolutely will do that, then you need to save 2 tank markers to spend on the fortresses if they are attacked. My first casualty here. It's slightly frustrating because the Germans had an even DRM and they had to get a DD against Ryazan to even create this situation, but I lose a unit here. However, at the end of the German turn in August 41, I have one more turn to survive a fair weather attacks. I'm right the way back at Stalingrad now, in the redoubt positions. I've still got a bit of air power, though I've burnt quite a bit. Sevastopol has fallen, Leningrad has fallen, and that's going to be a problem. And it's, again, not something I'd considered. That deprives the Soviets of 4 production points. At the moment I have 12, but I'm going to have to go through several months of having just 6 production points. And that's less than ideal. At the end of the German turn in September, the Soviets are still holding roughly that line. But the Axis line has a number of weaknesses. Of course, we need bad weather. A fair weather turn in October would be a disaster. This turn was held almost entirely by the judicious application of significant air power and 2 panzers being essentially unavailable because they'd been used on Sevastopol. And yes, I still have 38 national will at this point. A quick update on the UK position. They have held on in Iraq and now have both full strength units deployed there. They keep making occasional probing attacks on the Turks because if they get a lucky DD, that would be really quite a game changer. They never actually get that lucky, but it's always worth probing where it will really matter. Let's look at the weaknesses. The Yugoslav unit southwest of Moscow is only a garrison. If it suffers a DD, it will leave a no enemy zone of control, which will allow Tula to be retaken. And potentially worse, I have tank and air available, and this is what the odds look like. They're pretty good odds, 17 in 36, nearly 50% chance of killing that unit and breaking through. The Italian unit at the eastern point can be isolated. The tank counter for the Italians is available to protect it, but that is a very vulnerable position with potentially 7 Soviet attacks. And this is not unusual. In my experience, if a German player is drawn beyond the Leningrad-Rostov line, they always leave vulnerabilities that can be exploited at the end of September. In this case, I didn't play it quite as well as I should have. I took Kursk and saved a production point to build a unit in that city, and that was the wrong move. I should have taken Voronezh and used the production point to finish the damaged Italian unit. Every unit you kill thins the enemy line further and makes more breakthroughs easier. And this is a really good example of why I am not a great player. I think a lot of people assume that being good at a game is just a function of playing it, of experience, of learning strategy, tactics, etc. But it's not. Temperament is the real key to being good. And I'm not sure temperament can be learned. In this case, I looked at that move and I didn't make it. And I kind of knew it was the better move. This move that I've actually made is showy and dramatic, but it's not as effective as that tighter conservative move. And I should have made that move. And players with good temperament do that. They don't just know what the right move is, they consistently make it when they're presented with it. Anyway, this is going to come down to weather. Essentially, there is an 11 in 36 chance of a fair weather turn in October or November. If the Axis player gets it, they can stabilise against a September counterattack. If they don't, then this kind of position is lost and the game is pretty much over for the Axis. And on that note, I'm going to leave you with a cliffhanger. Did the Axis get their fair weather turn or not? If you would like to join the USE League, visit Board Game Arena and go to the group page, or contact the user Camber, who is the one responsible for organising it. And I'll see you next time.